For the first couple games of the series, it was all about the kids coming through for the Mets to win. In the series finale, it was the veteran stars that did it all as the Mets completed their sweep over the Angels.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, a great victory by the New York Mets to finish off a sweep over a team that they were just frankly better than. And I think the Angels gave the Mets a little bit of a gift here with a bullpen game, just allowed some of the Mets star hitters to maybe find their swing again. Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, both of them get some big hits, and they've been dealing with some deep slumps. So good to see them come around. Starling Marte makes his return to the lineup, hitting line drives every at bat. It was just a nice, easy, breezy day game win for the New York Mets. But it all starts with Sean Manaea. And if there's one thing you could take from this game that I think bodes well the most towards what the Mets need to do at this trade deadline, it's watching Sean Manaea at the beginning of that game and watching Brooks Raley at the end of that game, because there's now been two big holes on this team that could be plugged by Manaea and Raley. Sean Manaea was outstanding, and he came out guns a-blazing, struck out the side in the first inning. Brandon Nimmo hits a leadoff homer, so Manaea was working with an early 1-0 lead. Had a very strenuous second inning to keep that lead, but was able to work his way through. We've seen things like this in the past with Manaea, where he might walk a couple batters on matchups he doesn't like, pitch carefully. He gave up a leadoff single, walked a few, but got his way through the inning, did not give up a run. In the third inning, he did cough up that lead as Mike Trout went oppo for a home run. No shame in giving up a home run to a future Hall of Famer. But that was really it for Sean Manaea. That is all that he gave up in this start. Retired the final 7 batters that he faced, allowed just 2 hits, 2 walks, struck out 5 in 5 innings pitched, got up to 82 pitches. If that second inning wasn't as strenuous, you easily could have seen him getting a 6th inning, even with maybe an 85-pitch limit. So I think you're seeing, again, how effective Sean Manaea could be, how this is a guy that when he's right, he has that ability to just pepper the zone with fastballs and just dare guys to hit it. And it's a good strategy for him where, sometimes Mike Trout's going to clip you, but if there was nobody on, or if there was somebody on base, Manaea maybe pitches around Trout and then takes a chance at the next guy. But, base is empty. All right, challenge him. Trout gets you for a homer. Who cares? It's not that big of a deal, especially as you're completing 5, and that's all you've given up on a couple of hits. So really great start for Manaea. And then the Mets lineup was able to put him in line for a win right after he gave up that home run, actually. You had Tyrone Taylor drew a leadoff walk in the bottom of the third. Brandon Nimmo was hit by a pitch ahead of Francisco Lindor. And as I mentioned, the stars finally showing up. Lindor gets a hanging breaking ball. He was able to put into the outfield for a base hit to drive in Tyrone Taylor. I can't remember if he was at a 0 for 31 or an 0 for 32 at that point, but he was pushing up against a record you do not want to have, which is Ray Ordonez's franchise record of an 0 for 37 streak. So Lindor snaps that, gets a hit. Then after Juan Soto pops up, Pete Alonso is the one that delivers the big blow, a 3-run homer, his 22nd of the season. Now 4 away from Darryl Strawberry for the record. I think you wanted to hit maybe 3 on the road trip and then shut it down and make sure all those big home runs get hit at Citi Field. But awesome to see Pete Alonso, who's been struggling so much. I think he was on a 0 for 13 stretch before that homer. Good to see him get that one. 4th inning, Mark Vientos leadoff double, ends up running into an out on a ground ball off the bat of Luis Torrens, where Vientos probably should have held up. And if he did, maybe Brandon Nimmo would have had an RBI attached to his base hit a couple of batters later. But instead, Nimmo advanced Torrens to third. Francisco Lindor got the RBI, another base hit. So great to see Lindor get a couple of knocks, maybe feeling good, a little bit better after what was a tough stretch. That's the thing about this lineup right now. if you get Lindor and Alonso going with what you are seeing when it comes to some of the production on the back end with Brett Beatty, who continues to have 2 hits seemingly every game. Not sure if he got 2 in this one, but he definitely hit the ball hard a couple times. I know he got 1 knock. Starling Marte, like I mentioned, he was doing well. So the Mets have depth right now in their lineup. They have length to their lineup. What they haven't had is their 2 of their best 3 hitters showing up the last 4 weeks between Lindor and Alonso. So once those guys start to hit, and they drove in 5 of the 6 runs today, you're going to be in a good spot. So you look at the box score: 2 for 4 day for Alonso, 2 for 4 for Starling Marte. Beatty was 1 for 4. Vientos 1 for 3 with the double, and Nimmo 2 for 3, hit by a pitch, scored a couple of runs. So really good offensive game for the Mets. The bullpen held up after them, although Jose Budo had a rough inning. He had Huascar Brasman pitch a scoreless 6th. Budo, first game off the IL for him, ran into some trouble, gave up 3 hits and a pair of runs. But as I mentioned before, another really encouraging sign for the Mets: Brooks Raley came in with traffic on the bases, issues a walk to the first batter that he faced, has to go up against Mike Trout, gets him to hit a check swing ground out to get out of the first jam, issues a leadoff walk in the 8th inning, but then still got 2 more outs. And you just felt when a team's really good, you have at least an 8th inning guy that you can trust. And it's not that the Mets haven't had some high leverage guys that have worked for them this year. You've had Reed Garrett have great stretches, Huascar Brasman, great stretches, Jose Budo, great stretches. Ryan Stanek has been more hot and cold, but there has been a few hot streaks mixed in there. So you've had guys that have stepped up at different times. But there's yet to be a guy where you can just say, hey, the 8th inning's yours. And I think the Mets are very quickly getting there with Brooks Raley. I think that's why you probably want to get another lefty at the deadline, so that you just have Brooks Raley as your 8th inning guy, because he is just a steady hand on the wheel. And to be able to grab Raley for the final of the 7th inning and think, all right, this is the game. You have a 3-run lead to protect. You got Raley and Díaz to shut the door with an off day following. It just really shortens that game and allows you to hold on to leads a little bit better. So I think the biggest signs of encouragement from this game, of course, you can shout out Lindor and Alonso for finally getting hot, but I think you expect that, right? You expect them to get out of those rough stretches. But to see Sean Manaea look like himself for the beginning of the game, that is huge for this team. And Brooks Raley maybe makes it so that the pressure at the deadline is to get one high leverage lights out arm, maybe get a lefty as well. But Brooks Raley is looking like one of the biggest acquisitions this team's going to make this year. And it was a sign that they made whenever it was at the end of May. And it's bearing some real fruit right now. So awesome stuff from Raley and Díaz to close things out. Edwin did hit a couple of batters. Scary moment in the 9th where he hit Chris Taylor on the head. But after he hit a batter each time, he got a strikeout. So in the 8th inning, he was able to strand the 2 runners with an inning-ending strikeout. After he hit Taylor in the 9th, gets a strikeout, gets a ground out pop-up, and he's out of the inning with his 21st save of the season. So really good win by the Mets. What I want to talk about in the next segment is what is in store for the Mets coming up. I'm not going to give you a full series preview of Mets Giants, but where do things stand? You got an off day, and there's a road trip, and there's a deadline. I want to go through where things stand with this team here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can be. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. When I was using Monarch, I was shocked at some of the subscriptions that I had for years that I didn't even think about. And I was able to clean those up with Monarch Money. You also start to see where you're spending, and you realize, man, going to the movies every week, that might cost a little bit too much money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. And also, make sure you have the notification bell on so you know when one of us goes live. I hopped on live today after the game because Chris Schubert, who does our Locked On Mets postcast, was unavailable, but he usually is live right after the final out every single game. So make sure you check out Chris and our Locked On Mets postcast. Now, you look at where this Mets team is at. We'll see if the Phillies have finished up their game for the day. They're playing a night game. So right now, the New York Mets at the moment are back even with the Phillies and the National League East. But these two teams have been going, back and forth. It's a dead even race at this stage of the game. So you look at where the Mets are at and what is the road ahead before this deadline. They're going to go on a West Coast trip, and the Mets have been much better at home than they've been on the road this season. So it'll be very interesting. I don't think that the Mets can do anything over the next road trip that's going to drastically change the plans at the deadline, but there is a few things that you're going to be watching for very closely. So you're going to go out, you're going to play in San Francisco, tough ballpark to hit, really good pitching. Mets are going to face Logan Webb and Robbie Ray, two all-stars, if I'm not mistaken. At least guys have been pitching like all-stars this year. It's going to be a tough matchup for these Mets bats. And I don't think it really matters what Lindor does, what Alonso does. I don't think it matters what Brett Baty does, to be quite frank. I think Brett Baty has held his own so well ever since coming back up, and he's on this hot streak lately where you're just watching Brett Baty be a winning player day in and day out. What he's done at second base, third base. Today you saw a pop-up that Pete Alonso lost, and Brett Baty made the great run all the way over there and was able to bail him out. And yes, there was a play that you could say, oh, he made a mistake on in this game, one where he kind of olayed it. But he got lucky the night before playing a ball to his left that way on that type of a sharp hop. It hit his glove. He just didn't come up with it. I'm not going to get too mad at that, although Keith Hernandez, when it comes to bad fundies, he was letting Baty have it. You're supposed to wear that on the chest. Yes, it's 105 miles per hour, but take it and keep the runners at bay. But regardless, Baty, from what he's done defensively, the at-bats that he's had, I don't think that that's the guy you're really watching. I think the guys that you're watching really closely on this road trip is you're watching Mark Vientos and you're watching Ronny Mauricio. Because I think where the Mets are at right now, there might be a trade to be made to address this lineup. There might not be. The Mets might look at what they can get this trade deadline and say, you know what, better off to just stay in the house. If ultimately your decision is who is going to be starting Ronny Mauricio at second base, or maybe it's Brett Baty at second base with Mark Vientos at third base, and you have Starling Marte and Jesse Winker DHing after all. Like, who knows? Because here was Starling Marte again showing you that, yes, he's not going to be your left fielder. You probably shouldn't play him in the field ever again. But the guy can still hit. And remember last year, Starling Marte was a guy that really delivered in big playoff games. And so I just am very curious how the Mets are going to be looking at the market, looking what's out there, because there's not a lot out there. And we'll be talking about more of this stuff probably on tomorrow's show. The plan's going to be to do more of a deadline, like kind of a week out overview again. And then I'll have a draft show for Friday. So that's going to be what we're looking at for the rest of this week. But I think when you're looking at this road trip and what the Mets are going to be trying to decide, a lot of teams are going to look at what the Mets have. And let's say you're on the phone with the Pirates for David Bednar. They're going to want a bat that they can put in their lineup during the Paul Skeens window. So they're probably going to be asking about Vientos, about Baty, about Mauricio. And the crazy part about that conversation is I think Brett Baty has played himself out of any trade talks when 2.5 months ago, I think fans would say he was the guy most likely to be moved. But that's how fluid these things are. Mark Vientos and Ronny Mauricio are guys that will be thrown around in trade talks. I'm not saying they're going to get moved. The Mets might decide, you know what, we love what we have in the room. We love the environment in that clubhouse. And if they go on the road right now, and that's one thing that could be a little bit different. If the Mets reel off 3 more wins and they sweep the Giants and go into San Diego, and all of a sudden they go on this heater up until the deadline, and Ronny Mauricio is playing a role and they're mixing and matching playing time, the Mets might get to a point where all they do is they go out and trade for pitching. So I think the reason why I'm focusing on the offense right now when I'm talking about what there is to watch is because I think a lot of the other things are going to be decided. The New York Mets are going to canvass the market for relief help. That's going to happen. Brooks Raley coming back, that is another iron in the fire, but that does not stop the Mets from getting an arm or two. when it comes to the rotation. I think that's something to watch. Of course, it's going to be good to see Kodai Senga make another start this weekend. It's going to be good to see in the next series after that, Sean Manaea get on the bump again. Frankie Montas continue his progression back. But I don't know if anything they do on this road trip in their one start each is going to change how the Mets address their rotation. Because I think it's pretty clear if something falls into your lap that makes sense for a guy that you'd move into the front of the line of this rotation, maybe the Mets would entertain that. But it doesn't seem like they necessarily have to go out and be too aggressive to add to their rotation because they have 5 guys healthy. They have a guy who just made a rehab start in AAA that Mets fans aren't going to love him, Paul Blackburn, but he did just throw 70 pitches, and he's a MLB starting pitcher, I think. He might not be a great one, but as a backhand guy, he's depth. McGill is still depth. McLean and Sproat are still depth. So, this team's in an interesting spot where I feel like the Mets are primed to go on a run with what they have. And it's going to be about plucking the right pieces that are going to just be that accelerant. But it was good to see the Mets handle a team that they're better than in the Angels. I think they're a better team than the Giants. It's on the road, but go out and do your thing. So that's what's in store for this Mets team. But again, a great series. To have the first 2 games with Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty were really the guys that pushed you over the top. To have the bullpen have a really good series, that hasn't always been the case. But overall, I think the addition of Raley and also just getting guys like Reed Garrett, a break. The Mets were able to get through this series in pretty good shape at the pen. They got some good quality starts. And, they had one quality start, right? Was Peterson in this series? But regardless, was Peterson in the last series? He might have been the last series. So they didn't get a quality start. They got, I guess, 1 out away from a quality start with Montas. But, again, good starts from those 3 guys. And they were able to put themselves in a position to sweep a series. So now we'll see what they do on this road trip. Final road trip before the deadline. 6 games on the West Coast, which kind of plays well for deadline time because it allows us all to be up too late on social media, following Jeff Passan, and just wondering, okay, is there going to be any type of a bomb that drops this weekend? Very well could happen. But we'll have an off day tomorrow. Again, shows coming up. I'll do a trade deadline type show for tomorrow morning, and then you'll have a full draft recap with an expert. So I'm not just talking and out of my butt, basically not knowing most of these players that were just drafted. So I'll have a real expert that knows exactly who these guys are the Mets picked up and where the value was for the 2025 draft class for the Mets. Thank you all for tuning in and watching the show. Or for those of you who listen to the playback, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching it on YouTube. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. That's going to take you around all the action in Major League Baseball with their local experts offering insight, as well as league-wide hosts that are taking you through all the action. You can find every episode of Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB podcast feed or the Locked On MLB YouTube channel.